So we're up to block 8 now, and it's the flying geese block. This is where your skills are probably going to be tested, and you're going to have to take your time, because the smaller triangles get, the harder they are to actually get right. And by get right, I really mean get the sizing just right, because you can usually get the look pretty steady, but the size is a little bit off. So even this one is about 12 1/8 instead of 12 1/2. So you'll probably have to do this one over again and just kind of try to modify a little bit here and there and play with it to get the sizing just right, because when you have the size off, there's plenty of stuff that you can do to fudge things. And like I've shown you how to square up something. When you square up a triangle, what happens is you usually lose this point down here, and so you want it to come to a sharp point, and when you do your 1/4 inch seam on another thing, that those 2 points still meet up perfectly. And you also mess up this point up here, which is super noticeable. This one's not that noticeable. This one, however, will draw everybody's eye. And so if you have it a little bit off and you either have a gap here or you cut off the top of the triangle, then it really shows that you messed it up somehow. So this is when triangles get really fiddly. And so you have all the skills you need to be able to do this. And I'm going to walk you through how to do the modern method, which looks crazy complicated, but once you get the point of what you're doing, it's not that difficult, and it actually makes life a lot easier. And I'm going to walk you through how to line up triangles traditionally using the templates, because this is one of those that you might feel a little bit more comfortable actually going through and taking the time to cut out the templates and do it piece by piece. Because sometimes, especially with small triangles, taking that extra time and really working at it, it actually pays off in the end, because then you don't have to redo it over and over again until you get the size right. Taking that extra time and slowing down can actually get you a little bit more accurate sometimes. Not all the time, depends on how you do it. So I would do both ways and just see how you feel about it. There are some weird little things, but really learning how to do a flying geese pattern is crucial to doing any kind of star pattern later on, because what you're going to start noticing is most patterns, especially star patterns and things like that, they build off of other patterns. And so they will use like the 9-patch idea, but they will change out things for half square triangles or doing the flying geese or something like that, and that helps make parts of stars. And so once you understand how to put a triangle together, and especially the flying geese and the half square triangles, that'll get you pretty much in any kind of quilt, except for applique, that you'll probably be doing. But everyone loves a star, and the flying geese is a big component of most star patterns. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got my pieces already cut out, and I'm going to show you, well, actually let me keep this out as a reference so I can show you as I lay things out how it's going to go. And so for these long ones, I have this fabric right here, and those you don't really do anything to. Those are just panels that you'll fill in the side later. So those aren't a big deal. This is what will become my geese. And yes, they're just squares right now. And I'm going to show you how these squares become all 4 of your flying geese once you do a couple steps, or 3 or 4 or 5. So the first thing you're going to do, we'll move this out of the way. The red, this big square is what's going to become the geese themselves, and these little squares are what's going to become the sky that are on the edges. So the smaller triangles will be cut out of this. So you're going to take your big triangle, you're going to have it face up, so pretty side up, and you're going to take one of the little squares and you're going to put it pretty side down and line it up to one of the corners just like that. Then you're going to take a second one and you're going to go to the opposite corner and you're going to line it up. And then this is where I start pinning things. And so I'm just going to pin right here because I want it out of this area right here. I don't want those close there. And so I'm just going to pin it just so that they don't move, so you don't have to be super penny with it, and you don't want it covering a whole bunch of area. You just want them to hold points in place. Because now what I'm going to do, and this is going to look super crazy, I like turning it this way just because I'm right-handed and it kind of helps me be able to see what I'm doing. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it across from point to point where I lined up those little triangles or little squares. And I'm going to go, since this one's on top, I'm going to go up and I'm going to mark that center line there. And so I'm going to line it up point to point and then mark that center line. And you don't have to press very hard, and you need to test your pen before you do this. Pencil is always good. I didn't really have one that showed up very well here. This pen's not going to show up. I'm not going to make a whole bunch of lines. You don't really want to use like a Sharpie that's going to bleed a lot. So take a little scrap piece that you have and just kind of play with it and see how much it's going to bleed. Because ballpoint is probably better. This is just what I had on hand. But you don't want to have a lot of friction to it, so some ballpoints are a little too stiff and will pull your fabric. Or you can get some of those invisible quilting markers that they'll disappear when you wash them or disappear over time. That's just up to you. I just didn't really care to go find one of those or buy it or anything, because I'm sure I've got one somewhere, but I don't know where it's at, and I don't want to go buy one just for this. So this pen's going to be fine, and I'm going to just do my center line. Now let me show you what you could do, because what we're going to do with this now is we are going to sew 1/4 inch away from that center line that I just marked. And so if it makes you feel better, you can mark that line too. And I'll do the other side. And make sure you're actually doing that center line that you marked, not the other secondary line that you did. And then mark that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make 2 seams right next to each other, and then we're gonna cut down that center line that we marked. And that's gonna separate out and be the first step of making our 4 at a time geese. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine. So I've still got my 1/4 inch foot on here, and I'm gonna use it again later on. But I'm gonna have to pop that off, take it off however your machine works. Mine just pops out. And I'm gonna get a 1/4 inch seam. Now there are multiple feet that you could use for this. This one has that guide on it, and I love that for piecing. But since we are going through the center here, we can't use that guide. So I need something with a flat bottom that still gives me my 1/4 inch lines. And so this one actually has, let me see if I can get it to where you can actually see it. This one actually has red lines that are gridded so that you can see where the 1/4 is. So this edge of this part of the foot is the 1/4, and then it goes on back, and then it's just got a little bitty hole in the center. So That's not great if I want to follow the center line, and so line it up to this 1/4 inch mark that I made, but it's perfect for actually running down the center line that I made. So, of where I'm actually going to cut it. So I'm going to put this on there. And again, you'll have to figure out how your feet go on your machine. Mine just pop in and out. Well, if I can quit fumbling with it. There we go. And so now what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to do a seam down this outside edge outside line that I did here. And I'm actually going to line up to that center line that I did. Okay, so my center line's now lining up with that red line there. And I'm going to go really slow with this because I'm not the most careful quilter and I want this to be exact. And I really should have gone the other way with this so I didn't have this problem of this popping up on me. But I'll just hold it where it needs to be and do my best. Okay. So now you can either turn it around and go back the other way, which is what I'm going to do since I kind of did it the wrong way in the first place. Or you can go back the same way that you did the first one and you're going to do the other line. So I'm going to line it up again to that center line that I marked that I'll cut in a minute. And I'm going to go down the other side. Okay. So now I have 2 sewn seams right there and my center line still marked. And so I can take these pins out because I don't need those holding it in there anymore since I've sewn it down. I'm going to go press this seam to relax those stitches and then I'll show you how to cut it. Okay, so now we're going to cut right down that middle line that I marked. So I'm going to line it up again, point to point. And then I'm going to cut it right down the center. Oh, right down the center. That's going to be okay because I didn't get that far off, but yeah, try not to do that same thing. That's going to make it a little harder later on, but it's okay for right now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron these so that it looks like a heart. Now, this is where it looks even more crazy. You turn your heart upside down and then you take one of the other squares and you line up to that point on your main geese color. And then you line it up just like you did the other ones. And then you pin it in the corners. And you do the exact same thing. So I'm going to mark down the center. And if you want to mark the 3 lines, that's fine. I'm just going to mark the center one. Same thing to this one. grab the cutter, grab your pen, and mark that line. Alright, so now we go back to the sewing machine. And I'm going to do the same procedure. I'm going to line that up so that I line it right on my 1/4 inch, right down that center, and I go from down one side. Other side, and depending on your foot, this one you can line up on either side of the foot, and so I can just go up the other side. Your foot might not work that way, so just pay attention and make sure that both sides are actually giving you a 1/4 inch if you're doing it like this. Otherwise, just work with your machine, turn it around if you need to, whatever you need to do. To make sure you maintain that 1/4 inch, because like I said, with the triangles, this is where you start getting really off, and just it looks perfect until you measure it and it's just a hair off, or it's quite a bit off, and there's not much you can do about that. The points are never going to line up right if you don't have it exactly right. So it's important to maintain the 1/4 inch seam allowance as closely as possible. I try to emphasize that on everything, but quite honestly, if you're doing a 4 patch or a 9 patch, there's so many things that you can fudge to kind of cover that up, that if you miss a 1/4 inch, it's not that big a deal. Triangles are not that forgiving. So now we steam the seams again, and then I'll show you how to cut that one. Alright, so now we've got our upside down hearts with a square on top, and then we're going to go ahead and cut it the same way. So we're going to line up where we marked it, and we're going to go right through the center. And then this I'm going to iron out, and that's going to become my goose. So now we have 4 geese. Yeah, I didn't feel like it went through. There we go. Okay, now you're going to want to go through and actually trim off these little pieces here, because they'll just get in your way later. You don't have to be super exact, just don't cut into your work. Always remember, when you're using your rotary blade, to always close it before you walk away from it, especially if you have little hands around, because little hands like to grab shiny things, and if they grab any of that, they're gonna cut their poor little fingers. And quite badly, most likely. So, okay. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to make this like 3 panels. So I've got my 2 panels here. And so now I need to line up my geese like I want them. And they should be the same, so it doesn't really matter which one goes first. And then I'm going to fold this one down, and I'm going to seam this edge here. So this one, there's nothing really to line up to other than the edges. And if you're a little bit off up here where you've made your point, just try to fudge the difference as best you can, but really you don't want to have to do that if at all possible. I like to put the point to the center on the top so that I can control my seams a little bit better. And if you're wanting to aim for anything, aim for the point where those 2 seams meet right there at the top of your triangle. And if it makes you feel better, this is the point where you could put the piecing foot back on. Okay, so now we have that one, and we'll fold this one down, put it here. And I'll just wait until I'm done with all of them to go iron it. And you can kind of see as you go where you've hit it and where you haven't, so I'll iron this and show you where I missed it just a hair up here. Do my last one. Alright, so let me go iron it, and I'll show you where my points are a little off. Okay, so if you can see right here, you can see the green just above that, so the point isn't actually meeting the next triangle above it. So that one's a little bit short of 1/4 of an inch. So what I can do to fix that is I can do another seam, and I can try to nail it right there on that point where the 2 seams meet there. And the other ones look okay. This one's just a hair off, but not enough that I'm gonna bother with. This one's almost perfect. And so that one should be good. So let me go ahead and I'll do a seam on this one. And I don't know if you can see this, but you can see where the seams come up here and my 1/4 inch seam is just a little bit off there. That's where my problem is. I really want to aim for that right there where those two seams meet up. So let me try it again. And I'm going to be a little bit more careful about trying to hit it right on that point. Okay, so now that point matches right up at the bottom. So now let's see if I lost any size that way. So these are cut right at 12.5, so that's how big we want our finished block to be. So hopefully when I lay this on there, it's going to line up perfectly. Ooh, and it almost does. So this is where you start getting really excited when little things come together that you feel like every quilter knows how to do that, and they should, I bet they make it every time and it's not a big deal. No, it's always a big deal when you're triangles, especially flying geese, because you've got 4 consecutive triangles right there and so many points that could totally mess up. So it's a super exciting moment whenever you put this on there and you're like, wow, it's the right size. So that never goes away no matter how long you do this, because triangles are always tricky. When you hit those seams, sometimes your feed dogs want to eat the seam, so you might want to slow down and make sure that it's not going to either flip it over or bind it up somehow. And I think I'll actually go back over that again on the other side so that I have the smooth side at the bottom, because I feel like, well, that flipped over. I'm not going to fix that though. Well, yeah, I am. I'm going to redo it anyway. So I'm going to pop that so I can just flip that back where it's supposed to be. And I feel like where I hit the point, because there's so much bulk right there at those seams, it kind of shifted my needle over, or shifted the thing, shifted my piece away from the needle a little bit. And so it didn't quite hit where it was supposed to. It didn't stay at 1/4 inch. So I can always just redo it and just go right back over that. I don't have to do anything special. I don't have to rip out, because it was a fine seam. Oh, and I'm about to unthread my needle. So I need to pull that out. That's another one of my little, I know my machine and I know when I'm about to mess it up. So I need to scoot that just a little bit further in. Now we're good. So this should help me have just a little bit more control at the seam, and I just have to, that needle should stay down. There we go. And since this one was already flipped over, I'm going to hold it with my seam ripper, or if you have a stiletto you can, and make sure that it actually goes down right. So yeah, it looks like my long portions without the seams are fine, but where I hit the seams it kind of bumped my piece over, and so I really did need to go back and do this again. Alright. So now I've got that one on there. And you should see, well, I went a little over here. Your point should meet right up. Like this one's good. This one's a little cut off. And this one, there's just a hair of green between it. So it's not perfect, but hey, it's okay. It's not bothering me. And I am using directionals in my fabrics over here, so I wanted to make sure that the arrow was going the same way the geese are, and I want to make sure that my next one goes on the same way. So be careful, make sure your directionals stay directional. And I'm actually going to do this way. When my spool starts getting low, the tension kind of cinches up a little bit for some reason. It's one of the quirks of my machine, and so it really likes to unthread the needle all the time. And again, using pins here would have helped too, but I didn't. I'll probably need to do that one again. And occasionally I do like to grab the outfeed part and kind of just hold it, and it gives me just a little bit more control of what's happening to my edge over here. And so it kind of counteracts when the feed dogs are trying to scooch it over where it doesn't need to be. Alright. That one. Yeah, those two aren't good. So that one's okay. I'm just going to back up to right about there, because these 2 points are scooted over a little bit. So I know they're not going to match up like they should. So this time I'm going to focus more on where it looks like that point is. Try to make sure I hit that point. And that was my feed dog trying to, or my presser foot scooching it over. now let me go and iron it and we'll see how it looks. Alrighty, so pretty good. Not perfect, but close enough. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not stressing me at all. But looks like most of my points are close. That one's a little over. That one's a little under. And so it's okay though. I'm totally happy with that. And very few people are going to look at where my points are and really notice that it doesn't totally line up there. Most people never ever look at a quilt that close. So okay, let me show you how to use your templates to put together a flying goose. So I've cut these out, and I'm pretty picky about my scissors, but I'm not super picky about my scissors. But I did use craft scissors for the paper, and then I'm going to just use my fabric scissors for cutting it out. And so I just found some scrap pieces that fit the size, because I've had to redo some of these so many times that I'm kind of running out of fabric, especially larger pieces of fabric. So we'll see if I actually make it to the end of the quilt with the fabric that I chose. So I just pinned that on there and I cut it out, so that piece is done. And then this one I folded over because I need two of them, and I wanted to make sure that my line is straight here, so I just went ahead and gave me a little bit of a line there. And so I'm going to go all the way around this one. The other one I knew was already square, so it was okay. And you'll notice that the way that I cut out the templates is not exact to what it's printed out as, because they've rounded these, well, sort of rounded the points off. It's easier to just kind of go ahead and leave those points on there for now. What that represents is where you kind of cut those little tips off whenever you've got your flying goose together and those little pieces are kind of just sticking out, and we trim those off. That's just showing you that. But I would suggest go ahead and cut all the way to an actual point, because I feel like it actually does make a difference when you are putting your pieces together, and I'll show you why. When you are doing triangles, let's back up. When you're doing a square and you have 1/4 inch seam allowance, yada yada yada, you know that if you line up a square to a square, it's all going to match up. Problem with triangles is when you line up a triangle to a triangle, you usually have leftovers, and it's that 1/4 inch seam allowance typically. And so I want to put these where they're actually going to be. And so the way these templates fit together, what did I do with that other piece, is like this. And so you're going to sew this down here. And so I've got them lined up like I want them. And so when I do that, they do not line up. If I go point to point, I'm gonna have a big hangover over here. It's about 1/2 inch. So what you've got to do with a triangle, because when you fold this back, you're gonna have a big gap over here. So you want to line that up as centered as possible. And so you kind of push it in there, and you get kind of good at eyeballing to make sure that this hangover equals this hangover. And so you just make sure that when you're looking at it, you have about the same amount over the edges here. You do not need to get so picky that you actually measure it. You will see that it'll work out. So you want it to be a little bit over like that. And then again, this is when I do suggest pinning things, because especially when you've got that kind of little fiddly stuff going on, it's easy to get things off. And so now I'm going to do 1/4 inch this way. Now remember, this is on a bias. It's a little less painful when you are working with the squares like we did with the modern method, but this is definitely on the bias and it's going to stretch things. So be careful with it. You don't want that stretch in there, because then that throws your measurements totally off and your points are never going to match up like they're supposed to. Okay, so now we'll just sew down here. And I probably got a little close on that one, we'll see. And when you're working with triangles, it really probably is a good idea to do your back stitching and your stay stitches at the front and the end, because as you fold these open and stuff, you can start opening that seam up a little bit more than you want to. It's not super necessary, but it is one of those things that I've told you time and again, it's not really that big a deal because you're going to sew over it again anyway. But usually you have to manipulate these so much that it might fall apart before you actually get it sewn over. So that is something that you want to be just aware of and watch out for. So I am going to go ahead and go iron this, and then I'll put the next one on. Okay, so that one looks pretty good. Looks like I have it lined up like I should. And now I'm going to do the same thing going this way. And since the red one is the one that hangs over, I want to be able to see it more. And so I'm going to look there, and I'm going to look here. That looks about right. And so again, grab a pin, grab the strings too. And I want them pinned together, but I don't want it crossing where I'm going to do my seam, so I just want them to stay together kind of where I have them lined up. And so now I'm going to go the other way, this side. Okay, so now this is the moment of truth. So let me go press this down and we'll see if it actually lines up as a square or a rectangle. Okay, so it actually worked out. What I'm looking for is this to actually be a rectangle with the triangle meeting at the points there. And there needs to be about 1/4 inch left over up here. And these are the little bits that we're going to trim off. So that's where these little parts come from. I don't like pre-cutting them. You may. I like being able to see my overhang. I feel like I can line it up better that way. According to them, the people who make these templates, that should line up perfectly to the edge, but I am skeptical. So I go ahead, leave the points, cut them straight, and then I can go back and just trim those off. And again, you don't have to be super exact about that part. You just want to get them kind of out of the way. So I would try both methods. Just rotary cutting's the same way. You just, instead of using the templates, you just cut them out the way that the rotary instructions show. But then you put them together just the exact same way. And so You may be a little more accurate that way, just because I did take my time and I was much more careful about where things lined up, and then I didn't really worry about so much lining up my cuts and my rotary cut whenever I had them all seamed together. So it just is up to you which one you find more accurate and more your style. So okay, that is Flying Geese. And again, I do apologize, but you're probably going to have to do this more than once to really get them right, but that's just practice. You really do have to practice this one. And so once you've got doing your flying geese and doing your half square triangles, you can get into the more complicated stars and things like that and not feel overwhelmed. So that's it, and we'll see you at the next block.